Hey everyone, good evening. Well, the time has finally come to tackle a subject, I guess it's fair to say that I've really avoided going into too much in my 2 years or so of talking about why I left Islam and my criticisms of Islam in general. And so here it is, finally. I'm going to discuss Muhammad's marriage to Aisha, a very controversial subject within the Muslim community. And I'd say one of the main criticisms that you'll hear about Islam from people in the West who maybe don't know much about Islam. And I would lump in people who are uh, white supremacists, people who are genuinely Islamophobic. I think Islamophobia is a real thing. And at the same time, I think it is a legitimate criticism of Islam for reasons I'm going to explain in a little bit as we listen to the lecture of Muslim apologist, historian Adnan Rashid, who will attempt to defend Muhammad's marriage to Aisha. So let's see how many people we have in the live chat right now. All right, we've got a few people here. Can everyone hear me okay? If someone can let me know in the live chat if the audio levels are all good. Great comment from you. Thank you so much for coming, Coco Jasmine. So Coco says, it has come to the point that even people who are not aware of its shy away when her age is discussed, because it really is a sensitive issue. And the one thing I'll say is it's almost like a human psychology thing where we are most defensive, most aggressively defensive when it comes to defending the things that we know we're most weak and vulnerable at. And in the case of the Muslim community, they know it looks bad. They know it looks bad in this day and age, in the year 2022, and even long before 2022, that their prophet, the person who's supposed to be the role model, someone who's the final messenger from God himself, would marry someone that young. And at the same time, just because Islam is so important to people's lives, a lot of Muslims' lives, they found ways to rationalize it in their minds. So with this lecture by Adnan Rashid, which I did watch beforehand in preparation for this stream. So I kind of skimmed it. So I didn't watch it fully because I wanted to stay a little bit fresh. But I'm not saying that Adnan Rashid is speaking for all Muslims on this topic. What he is doing, though, is he's sharing arguments that I've heard a lot in the Muslim community. And one thing you should know about me as well. So when I was Muslim, growing up Muslim, I I can't even remember being told or being taught that Muhammad married Aisha that young. So I knew he married her. I knew the whole history of that. Her age was never something that was mentioned. It was never a topic that was brought up in school, never brought up at home. And I think I only really learned about it after I left Islam. So it wasn't the reason I left Islam. And who knows, even if when I was still Muslim, I found that out, I probably would have rationalized it much in the same way that someone like Adnan Rashid does. So, with that being said, I'd love to get started. Does anyone have any questions before I get going, or shall we just do it? Oh, what a great way to end the week for anyone who's living in North America uh, or even in Europe. The week has just ended, Saturday and Sunday, and what a what a great way to do it. Talking about someone marrying a 6-year-old. Yeah. But at the same time, as much as it is kind of a horrifying topic to discuss, I think it really is important to discuss it because Muhammad is a role model for a lot of people. And with that kind of elevated status he has, everything he did should fall under great scrutiny, which is why I think someone like Adnan Rashid did this lecture. So yeah, looks like no questions. So I think we should just go ahead and get started. All right. let's see here.
Ustad Adnan Rashid is associated with the Hitin Institute. It's an organization in the UK. He's the head of the organization and a senior researcher and lecturer. He has an interest in history with a speciality in the history of Islamic civilization,
Can everyone hear
comparative
that?
religion, and hadith literature.
I, for some reason,
He is
cannot.
also a specialist in Sirah. He holds an honors degree in history
Hold
from
on
the
one
University of
second.
London and has ijazas in hadith and from a number of scholars. He possesses a keen interest in Islamic numismatics. It's one of the areas
Sorry
of
about that.
knowledge that he says has been ignored by particularly Muslim scholars of the past, but is now, there's a
All right.
revival, inshallah, that's being envisaged. Presently, he's serving as a khatib in a number of London mosques and is also conducting an extensive tafsir course. He believes that Islam is a way of life which promotes modernity in all of its positive manifestations and provides realistic solutions for all problems facing mankind. Now, with that kind of expertise, with that kind of background, and the topic that we have, we inshallah look forward to a enlivening, illuminating presentation, inshallah. I'd like to welcome Brother Adnan Rashid.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه الغر الميامين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وما أرسلناك إلا رحمة للعالمين وقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بلغوا عني ولو آية. Respected brothers and sisters, I thank you all for attending this very important event. As highlighted earlier, that Islamophobia has become a global phenomenon. It is now all around the world. It can be found everywhere, even in the Amazon jungle. The propaganda has reached there, and Muslims are being tarnished by the international Islamophobia industry, which dominates the global media, unfortunately. This is partly because of the Muslims. Muslims have neglected dawah. Muslims have neglected true representation of their faith. Muslims have neglected books in general. We have become a bookless people, and that has consequences. We were once upon a time the most intellectually charged people in the world. We were the most bookly people in the world. We had the largest libraries in the world. We had the best institutions in the world. For over 1,000 years, Muslims dominated the world economically, militarily, intellectually, educationally, you name it. We had it all. After colonialism, things went downhill. But I would go as far as to say that.
So I just want to make a comment here that it's so, this kind of captures the Islamic mindset so perfectly. So look at the way he starts. So Islam is under attack by Islamophobes, and it's our fault. So the problem isn't with Islam, it's our fault because we're neglecting our education, we're neglecting our books. But he also adds that we were the Muslim world was at the pinnacle until colonialism. So it's our fault, speaking for Muslims, that we aren't as bookly as he said, but it's also the fault of the colonial Westerners who oppressed us. And I always find it so interesting that whenever framing these kinds of discussions, Muslims always come from this point of victimhood. And I'd almost describe it as well as like a inferiority complex that's wrapped up in a superiority complex. We were so great once upon a time, and our religion was so great, but it's being attacked now, and we have to stand up for it. It's always that kind of mentality, which I suppose does make sense if you're living in a Western community where you're being oppressed all the time. But I don't think you could say that that's the case for big parts of North America. If anything, people are very very strident against Islamophobia these days, and in big parts of the world, Islam is in a very prominent place. So I don't think that Islam is as big of is as much under threat as a lot of Muslims claim it is. If anything, the tide seems to be shifting in the other direction. And Music Guy says there's no such thing as Islamophobia, but anti-Muslim bigotry exists instead. So that's an interesting comment, Music Guy, because it's tough, because I see your point. Like the problem with the word Islamophobia is that it's been co-opted, where any kind of criticism of Islam is lumped in as Islamophobia, even if it's, I would say, justified criticism, or even if it's criticism coming from within the Muslim world or from ex-Muslims who are often, have very deep ties with the Muslim world, even though they don't believe anymore. But with that being said, I do think that, as you said, there is definitely anti-Muslim bigotry. It's just I don't mind calling it Islamophobia. It's just we have to distinguish between legitimate criticisms of Islam and what generally is what you just said, anti-Muslim bigotry. But anyway, let's let him continue.
Until the 18th century, Muslims still held the field in technology, in leading the world in technology and education, and most importantly, morality. The greatest achievement of Islamic civilization or the Muslim civilization is moral values, ethical uprightness of Muslims. And up to the 18th century, we led the world in this field. Now, you may be thinking, 18th century, what happened in the 18th century? How? The Ottomans were facing decline quite early on. In the 17th century, the Ottoman decline started after the second siege of Vienna failed, 1687 or 1689, and there we lost our dominance, political, educational, civilizational dominance of the world, right? But in the 18th century, in India, something very special happened. There was a state called Mysore, and it was governed by a man called Tipu Sultan, who was an embodiment of religiosity as well as, if you want to call it, technology or scientific advancement. He was a living proof of the fact that Islam or religious conservatism or Muslim identity does not contradict science or scientific advancement in any shape or form. If anything, Islam is a force that encourages advancement and education. And this is what our civilization stands for. So we will be talking about Tipu Sultan in due course. In October, we are planning to do a tour de force through his history and his achievements. Not a lot is known about this person, unfortunately. He is very neglected, like other Islamic fields. So the purpose is to wake the Muslims up, to reassert your civilization, to stand up for your values and your heroes and your people. Teach your children about them so that you can know about them, to resuscitate your already dying civilization. But it will not die, because Allah's promise is to keep it alive. We need it. We need to be part of this movement, this civilization, not the other way around, because Allah has promised to protect His way. His deen will live. So this is another topic which is directly linked to our decline in education. We have many intellectuals around the world, many great scholars, many book collectors and libraries. And I would like to thank Al-Ikhlas Academia Library for facilitating events like this to intellectually stimulate the Muslims, to wake them up to the reality and the importance of books, why books are important, why education, why studying our sciences. When I say sciences, I don't mean what you study in the university for your stomach, for your jobs, what you want to do in your jobs, your career. That's a different thing altogether. I'm talking about studying your civilization, studying your literature, your faith. Why should you believe? Why are we Muslims? And if we are Muslims, how do we actually defend our faith against attacks? So there are many vulnerable areas Islamophobes attack. In order to demonize and dehumanize Muslims and Islam, Islamophobes raise certain questions, and these are sound bites. These are sound bites they throw at people to put them on the back foot. And many times Muslims, unfortunately, youngsters, and in some cases elderly, are put on the back foot. They start to become apologetic, and they start, because they don't have the knowledge how to defend their faith, their values, their civilization, they are put on the back foot. They immediately become apologetic because they don't know how to defend. They don't know how to defend because they don't have the knowledge to defend. They're not into books. They don't read Islamic history. They don't read the history of the Prophet of Islam, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They don't read human history in general. So on a positive note, things are changing, alhamdulillah. There is a global wind of positivity when it comes to Muslims. Muslims have come to realize there's something wrong. We are being misrepresented on the global scene by the international media. So we need to stand up for ourselves. We need to create our own media. We need to create our own hubs, our own spaces where we can intellectually indulge in our sources and find answers. One of the questions that comes up time and time again and again, that question is the age of Aisha radiallahu anha. Islamophobes and sometimes very bigoted Christian missionaries or atheistic extremists or
Okay. I just want to make a point here. So listen to the way he frames it. So the argument about criticizing Aisha, it comes from Islamophobes, bigoted Christians, and atheist extremists. So what he's essentially saying is anyone who's talking about this has some sort of agenda against Islam. There's no way they could have a legitimate criticism or argument. It's all, extremist bigotry, Islamophobia. And the reason I'm Coco Jasmine says, can you count how many times he says Islamophobe? Oh my God, if we had like a ticker in the corner or something. The problem I have with this is, while I'm not denying that it's true that there are bigots, there are Christian extremists or whatever who target this thing, when he's looking at it from this mindset, there's no possible way he's looking at it and thinking, could there be something here? Maybe this is problematic. Maybe they do have a point. It's coming from this frame of we're under attack, and as he's saying it very clearly, like Muslims are pushed against the back of the wall, and they have to feel like they must defend themselves. So there's no intention or even desire to see it from the other perspective. It's Muhammad couldn't have done something wrong, and the problem is, as he said earlier, that Muslims aren't educated. They're not reading books. They aren't reading the defenses that apologists like myself have come up with to justify what he did. And when you kind of go into it with that kind of mindset where you're just setting out to prove the other side wrong without even considering the possibility that maybe there's something right, then you're doomed to just perpetuate and repeat the same mistakes. So anyway, let's continue.
Atheist activists, they attack Islam on the age of Aisha. They say Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam married Aisha when she was 9, therefore he was not a moral man. And if he was not a moral man, how can you even follow him? On what basis do you believe that he's the prophet of God? Have you lost your minds? These are the questions that come up occasionally, frequently on global media. While previously there could be a nuanced discussion on the media, but increasingly in the last decade, in the last decade, when I say last decade, since 2010, for some reason, people who appear on the media to represent Islam and to attack Islam are the same. They are the same type of people. Those who are attacking because they're Islamophobes, and those who are defending are also a bunch of Islamophobes. So it's
I have no idea what he's talking about when he's saying this. I live in Canada, and if anything, what I've noticed in the past 15 years, 10 years is there's a movement in the opposite direction of really attacking criticism of Islam, anti-Muslim bigotry and Islamophobia. And there's an increasing number of Muslim voices and personalities on TV, in newspapers, magazines, publications, online that are defending Islam, and they are Muslim. They're not Islamophobes. So I don't know if he's talking about uh, other countries. Maybe it's a bigger problem in Eastern Europe, but I think like even in countries like the UK and even the US, even though the US has problems with Trump and other white supremacists, I think that the tide is actually going in the other direction. So I legitimately have no idea what he's talking about. Maybe someone in the comments in the live chat can tell me about if they think it's actually true what he's saying, that it is increasing in their countries if they live in a country besides Canada. But for me personally, I think it's completely opposite.
Drama, as if Islam cannot be defended. So people who can give answers have systematically been put aside or being ignored. Today we will see how today we will give you an example of how Islam is deliberately misrepresented, how Islamophobes deliberately ignore straight evidence that puts them to shame for attacking the Prophet, peace be upon him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And they're only successful with ignorant people. And unfortunately, most people are ignorant. Most people do not study, whether they are Muslims or non-Muslims.
Okay, so if you are on the opposite side of Adnan Rashid on this thing about Muhammad's marriage to Aisha, you're a bigot and an extremist, an Islamophobe, and you're ignorant. No possible way that you might have something true to say, something insightful to say. You were just talking earlier about how there's no nuance in the media about discussions on Islam. Where's the nuance in his depiction of people who are making this criticism? That's just my opinion.
They don't study books. So today we will see how evidence vindicates the Prophet ﷺ from the accusation of being some kind of sexual deviant, a'udhu billah. And there's another word very often used in public nowadays on social media, on mainstream media, that Prophet Muhammad, a'udhu billah, thumma a'udhu billah, was a pedophile, by the mere virtue of having relations with a child. And we will see how that works. We will see whether Aisha was a child, whether marrying younger women was a crime, whether he did something wrong, and if he did something wrong, was he criticized? And if he was criticized, when was he criticized for this? And if he was not criticized, why was he not criticized? These are some of the questions we will address. But before we address all these questions, something has to be established.
All right, before he gets into that, let's take a look at some of the comments. So, Friendly Muslim, hi Friendly Muslim, thank you for coming. So he's talking about the right wing that were attacking Muslims violently on a weekly basis in the UK when the lecture took place. So yeah, that is a fair point. There definitely is, especially with Brexit and everything, there definitely is an element in the British population that is very anti-Muslim. That's definitely true. My point is that if you just look in the media, specifically the media, in many countries in the West, the tide has completely turned in favor of Islam. So I don't really buy the whole thing of Islam's under attack. Look at us, we're not even being represented properly in the media. Only Islamophobes are even defending us. I just don't buy that. Reason on Faith says, great point, secular spirit. No nuance from him about people who ask being decent and sincere, he has to make us out as devils. Yeah, exactly. Like I'm not trying to demonize Adnan Rashid personally either. I want to hear the guy out, and as we're gonna see as we keep going, I actually agree with him on a couple of key points. And Ali says the P word. So this is like a thing that I'm gonna get into later on when Adnan Rashid talks about it. But I think it's not entirely accurate or fair to call Muhammad a pedophile. And the reason I say that is because someone who's a pedophile is someone who is primarily or exclusively attracted to prepubescent children. And I don't think we can necessarily definitively say that's the case with Muhammad based on the fact that he married Aisha when she was 6 years old and consummated when she was 9. So he didn't consummate the marriage with her until she hit puberty, first of all. And it was the norm of his time, as Adnan Rashid is going to go into a second. I'm not justifying it. I'm just saying that I don't think he did it because he was a pedophile, if that makes sense. And thank you for agreeing with me, Reason on Faith. I don't use, he agrees, I don't use the P word. Well, the thing is, there's a lot of things we can criticize Muhammad for that we don't need to resort to something that isn't wholly accurate and that we also know is very inflammatory and aggravates Muslims. What I always say is when I'm talking to especially people within the ex-Muslim community, Muslims are the biggest victims of Islam. We should be trying to help them see the truth of their religion and see that they should leave it for themselves. So unnecessarily aggravating them is something that is, I would say, counter to what our aims should be if we want to try to get the world to get over Islam. And hey, Secular Sakai, thanks for joining as well. We're just about to get into it momentarily with Adnan Rashid. So, all right, let's do it.
There is a modern movement now among Muslims. Some Muslims are doing it out of their sincerity, their love for the Prophet. They simply wash away their hands. They wash their hands away, from hadith. They throw away the baby with the bathwater. They say hadith literature is not trustworthy. Therefore, Aisha was not 9. She was 18. They come up with these theories that Aisha could not have been 9. And they do all these calculations. They find weaker reports within the Islamic literature to substantiate their view. Okay, and they make insinuations or they make inferences using weaker, indirect, vague evidence to make a specific points. While on the other hand, we have specific evidence giving us the age of Aisha at the time of marriage. So a lot of Muslims, in order to defend the Prophet, because they don't understand their theology, their literature, they start to make lame excuses or lame defenses. Others are outright modernists, hadith rejectors. Some people do not accept hadith entirely, which is also extremism. You cannot put the entire hadith literature into one basket or into the bin. You can't do that, because without the hadith literature, some parts of the Quran are incomprehensible. Hadith complements the Quran. Without the hadith literature, parts of the Quran are completely incomprehensible. You cannot be a Quran-only Muslim. You cannot be a Quran-only Muslim. That's impossible, because Quran itself tells you to be a Hadith also Muslim. Because Quran itself tells you that you cannot understand the Quran by the Quran itself. No doubt, the Quran is the first and the best source to understand itself. Quran explains the Quran, but then there are other sources that also explain the Quran.
Oh my god, I always find this funny. So I actually kind of like what he's saying here relatively to what other Muslims say. It's just so absurd, because God gave us this revelation of this Quran, and the Quran can speak for itself, except when it doesn't speak for itself, then we need this other stuff. So why create this confusion within the Muslim community where he's saying you cannot be a Quranist only. I don't think he can definitively say that. I've known Muslims who do not pay attention to hadith and they only follow what's in the Quran, and I've known Muslims who pay attention to the hadith as well as the Quran. So I don't think you can just dismiss one kind of Muslim like that, like he's doing. And the thing that's so awkward about it then too is when you have to also resort to the hadith, you end up with all these unreliability issues with the chain of narration, which is what the hadith is dependent on. And this is something that Adnan Rashid is going to get into in a second. Friendly Muslim says, this is where I disagree with him, and other scholars more qualified than him would disagree with his statement about the 16 and 19 narrative. So Friendly Muslim, I would say it's fair to say that one of the pillars of Islam is the hadith, and there's nothing more reliable as far as I'm aware than Sahih Bukhari, which is where we get the account of the age of Aisha. So to dismiss that is something that would unravel a very significant part of the Islamic tradition. So I don't think you can say that scholars who are more qualified than him can just disagree with him when the evidence is right there within a very powerful part of the Islamic tradition. But let's see him argue it.
There are many reports in the Quran, there are many verses in the Quran that highlight the point that you need the hadith to understand the Quran. For example, in Surah An-Nahl, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem, وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرَ لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ مَا نُزِّلَ إِلَيْهِمْ. We have revealed dhikr upon you, O Muhammad, so that you may explain to them what has been revealed upon them. In other words, you have to explain, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what has been revealed upon them. So how does the Prophet explain? In what language? In what form? That form is called the Sunnah, the Hadith. The words of the Prophet are preserved in some of the most authentic sources of the Quran, such as Bukhari and Muslim. So these are some initial points I wanted to highlight, and we will see how the hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha, where she herself made the statement that I was 9 when the Prophet consummated the marriage. The marriage, the betrothal, was done when she was 6, and it was consummated when I was 9. This cannot be doubted. If you are consistent about Islam and Islamic literature, this hadith cannot be doubted. Why? Let me clarify why that is the case. So the hadith is in Bukhari, Sahih Bukhari. There, Aisha radiallahu anha herself states, she is reported to have said that the Prophet was betrothed to her when she was 6 years old, and he consummated his marriage when she was 9 years old. And then she remained with him for 9 years. So Aisha was 18 when the Prophet ﷺ passed away. This hadith cannot be doubted for a number of reasons, as we will see in due course. A lot of the hadith rejectors or modernists who are Muslim, they attack this hadith by using one of the reporters' name. They claim that there is only one reporter who is in the chain who reported this hadith. His name is Hisham bin Urwa, and he was the son of one of the nephews of Aisha radiallahu anha, who was Urwa bin Zubair, the son of Zubair bin Awam. So these attackers of this hadith, or people who attack this hadith, and they say this is inauthentic, this hadith is not authentic because there's only one narrator who narrates this hadith, and he is untrustworthy. Because some of the hadith authorities stated later on that in his old age, he became forgetful. So it is very possible that he might have mixed up the age. He might have got the age wrong. Therefore, the hadith cannot be trusted, because the only source of this information is Hisham bin Urwa, the son of Urwa bin Zubair. Is everyone with me so far? So I want you to pay attention, because we're going to go through a roller coaster ride in this, right? In this discussion. And you're going to have to be switched on all the way.
Oh my! It's just so. So Coco Jasmine says, "Stop worshiping Muhammad." So this is the problem of all this stuff. When you are forced to have this religion, and part of this religion is that Muhammad was this amazing role model, that he was perfect in so many ways, if not completely perfect. I guess that's open to interpretation amongst Muslims. Then you have to find some sort of justification for what he did, because the sunnah of the prophet is used as a role model in so many other aspects of life. So in something as important as marriage, the fact that he married someone as young as 6 is something that has to be justified. This is the problem that Muslims end up in, where they have to dive into these weird rabbit holes of, oh, but the chain of narration isn't reliable because this guy from 1400 years ago became senile or something towards the end of his life. And you're just thinking, like, how did we end up in this point where we have to do this? It's so sad. This is the thing that's so frustrating, I find, about Islam, is there's good stuff in it, but then you end up bogged down into these weird things, as we're going to see in this roller coaster ride with Adnan. All right, let's do it. In this roller coaster ride with wrong one. Sorry about that. Oh, where did it go? Sorry. I think I lost it. Sorry about that. Just give me one moment. All right, found it. Let's continue.
The age wrong. Therefore, the hadith cannot be trusted, because the only source of this information is Hisham bin Urwa, the son of Urwa bin Zubair. Is everyone with me so far? So I want you to pay attention, because we're going to go through a roller coaster ride in this, right? In this discussion. And you're going to have to be switched on all the way so that we don't miss anything. And if anything is missed, you can come back to me during the Q&A and we can cover it, inshallah ta'ala. So this hadith is in Bukhari, and scholarly opinion is, when I say scholarly opinion, scholarly consensus is that majority of the reports, and when I say the majority, 99% of the reports in Bukhari are 100% authentic. These attributions cannot be doubted because of the diligent criteria of Imam Bukhari, which has also been studied by the scholars of Islam. He was very, very diligent in preserving the Sunnah. He did not willingly, knowingly, intentionally attribute any false information to the Prophet ﷺ or to his family or otherwise. Everything in Bukhari found with a chain of narrators is authentic. The scholars of Islam, from the day one to the day last, since the time of Bukhari up to this day, scholars, traditional scholars of Islam, have never questioned the veracity and the authenticity of Bukhari. In fact, there's a well-known idea, well-known principle among the scholars of Islam, and that principle is that the most authentic book after the Quran is Sahih al-Bukhari. After the Quran, the most authentic book is Sahih al-Bukhari. And there's nothing in Sahih al-Bukhari that will directly contradict the Quran. Rather, Bukhari, the information therein, actually complements the Quran. It explains the Quran. So Hisham bin Urwa.
So So that's an interesting point by Coco Jasmine. So not only is Muhammad infallible or whatever, it's Bukhari who apparently could not have made a mistake. Everything he researched and confirmed with his methods is definitely accurate and correct. I think it's important to note here that Bukhari, I believe he lived 200 years or so after the time of the Prophet. Someone can correct me if I'm mistaken. He definitely wasn't a contemporary scholar. And the method that he used, I don't want to oversimplify it, but one of the main things he relied on was having a chain of narration to determine the veracity of the hadith. So he would start from his time period and hear it from someone and make sure that they were a reliable, trustworthy source. And then he'd ask them, where did you hear it? And then on and on and on until he went to the root source, which is, of course, Muhammad and probably one of the Sahaba, his companions around him, heard it from him. So here's the problem with this kind of method. There's no way that it could be completely accurate, just if you think about it logically speaking. Over the span of a couple generations, things must have gone lost, things kind of got blurred, confused. And I mean, if any of you have played like that game, I think it's called Telephone, where you whisper something in someone's ear and that person whispers it to the next person, and then you just go down the line. By the end, it's often something completely different. I'm making a joke here, but I think you get my point that clearly things can get lost over the years. And so I'm not saying this to deny the veracity of the hadith necessarily. We don't really know for sure, like within 100% of historical accuracy, what happened. What I think is important is that a lot of Muslims believe the hadith, especially Bukhari's hadiths, are accurate. And a lot of Muslims believe Muhammad married a 6-year-old and consummated the marriage when she was 9. So whether it's historically accurate or not, it's kind of irrelevant because that's what Muslims believe. A lot of Muslims believe. So, all right, so let's continue.
Was he the only narrator? Those who attack this hadith by making this claim are absolutely ignorant of the science of hadith, because he is not the only narrator. Even if he was weak as an individual, as a source, he's not the only narrator. He was not weak. He was very strong. Many scholars vindicated him from accusations against him. So Bukhari accepted his reports. He was not weak, right? And the fact that Bukhari accepts a report from a narrator, that means that narrator is trustworthy. That narrator cannot be doubted when it comes to his trustworthiness, because Bukhari was very, very diligent with this criteria. In fact, Imam Bukhari, there is a report about him that he went to collect hadith from a man, and this man was trying to deceive a donkey with an empty pot. He had an empty pot in front of the donkey. He was trying to lure the donkey to follow him, right? And Bukhari realized that there is nothing in the pot and he's trying to deceive the donkey. Bukhari said, whether he is trustworthy or not, I am not going to take reports from him. Why? If he can deceive a donkey, he can surely try to deceive others. So for that reason, I mean, there was nothing wrong with that man. He was not doing anything wrong in Sharia, Islamically, but he was so diligent, Bukhari, in collecting his reports from his sources that he would never take a report from anyone if there was any room for doubt on that person's character. And Bukhari...
Thanks, Shannon, for that. So I'm not saying that Adnan Rashid is basing his trust in Bukhari on this one anecdote. It's just so funny. I always find it funny when people use examples like that to show, see, he wouldn't even trust that person because he was mean to a donkey. He tried to deceive a donkey. He must be trustworthy in everything. I don't buy that logic. I mean, even if that incident really happened, that doesn't make him wholly accurate and reliable in everything. Now, does it? Anyway, all right, let's go.
Bukhari's Rijal, or the men who Bukhari narrated from, are well known. They are well studied, and we are not blind followers of Bukhari. We don't follow Bukhari, Imam Bukhari, in a blind way. We're not blindfolded when we follow Bukhari. Rather, other scholars have come later. They have studied Bukhari's chains and his criteria and the men he narrated from, and they reached the same conclusion that Bukhari was just in his treatment of narrators. So Hisham is one of the narrators from Bukhari. But is he the only one? It was narrated from Aisha via a number of isnads. Not by one isnad only, as some ignorant people claim. The most well-known chain of narration is that of Hisham, no doubt. And Hisham narrates from his father, Urwa bin Zubair, and he narrates from Aisha. This is one of the soundest narrations, as Urwa bin Zubair is one of the most well acquainted of people with Aisha because she was his maternal aunt. Urwa was the son of Asma bint Abi Bakr, who was a stepsister of Aisha. So Urwa was very close to Aisha radiallahu anha, the father of Hisham. Therefore, this chain is very, very strong. But was he the only person who narrated? No. There are chains independent of Hisham, independent of Hisham. For example, Imam al-Zuhri and Imam al-A'mash. It was also narrated via another chain by a Zuhri from Urwa, Ibn Zubair from Aisha. So Zuhri is directly narrated from Hisham's father, which is Urwa, and he narrates from Aisha. Same report, that she was 9 when the Prophet consummated the marriage, and she was 6 when she was betrothed to the Prophet ﷺ. The engagement or act was at 6. And there's another question that comes from it, that why did the Prophet wait for 3 years? What was going on? Right? Why wait for 3 years? We will address the point later on, inshallah ta'ala. Why? Okay, betrothal has taken place at 6. What's the waiting about? Right? So we will see why. It was also narrated via another chain by Al-Amash from Ibrahim al-Nakhai, from Al-Aswad, and from Aisha radiallahu anha. So completely independent. The chain is independent of Hisham and his father. So there are independent chains that do not have Hisham and Urwa in the chain. Then Ibn Amr and Ibn Hatib, also independent of Hisham and Urwa, his father. It was also narrated by another chain from Muhammad bin Amr, from Yahya ibn Abdurrahman bin Hatib, from Aisha radiallahu anha. So Urwa is not there and Hisham is not there. Independent narrators. Therefore, this chain or this report cannot be doubted. It is multiply attested. It is not from one source, rather multiple individuals narrated from Aisha, and their students narrated from their teachers, like we see here on the screen. So we have chains of Urwa where Hisham is not there. Other people are narrating from Urwa. Sheikh Abu Ishaq al-Hawaini compiled the names of those who followed Urwa bin Zubair in the chain, namely Al-Aswad bin Yazid, Al-Qasim bin Abdurrahman, Al-Qasim bin Muhammad bin Abi Bakr, Amra bin Abdurrahman, and Yahya bin Abdurrahman ibn Hatib. So multiply attested reports. Then there are independent chains. There are people who are narrating from Hisham, a number of people who narrate from Hisham. He also compiled.
Has anyone noticed how many people have been in the video, in the lecture, have been just leaving to, I guess, oh, this is the part where he's just rambling about all these dead people's names. Maybe now is a good time to go. But I Coco Jasmine, thank you. People are not impressed with chains of narrations. So it is tedious, but I kind of understand why he's doing this, because it is important to, if the claim is that, well, we only have this one unreliable narrator that's saying this, he's showing that that's not the case. And again, like, it's impossible to fathom that maybe Muhammad made an error here. We have to get down into the weeds with this stuff. That's the only way.
The names of those who followed Hisham bin Urwa in narrating this hadith, there were Ibn Shihab al-Dhuhri and Abu Hamza Maymun, the freed slave of Urwa. Then there is this accusation that because most of these people who narrate from Hisham are from Iraq, therefore they're not trustworthy. 9 out of 10 reports from Iraq were generally rejected by the scholars of hadith. Why? Because it is well known among the scholars of hadith, because of Tashayyu', because of the Shia influence in Iraq, a lot of the reports were untrustworthy for the Sunni authorities. The Sunni authorities, Sunni collectors of hadith, did not trust the Shia reporters, right? So because Iraq was a hub of Shia activity, a lot of the hadith authorities were very, very iffy about reports coming from Iraq. So one of the accusations is that most of these narrators who report this hadith from Hisham are Iraqis. Therefore, these reports cannot be trusted. And all of these claims are based upon ignorance of the science of hadith, as you can see there. Because there are reporters from Hisham who reported from Medina. They were in Medina and they reported this hadith from Hisham. Then there were reporters in Makkah, in Ray. Ray is, by the way, Iran, right? Current day Tehran is Ray, right? And Iran has not always been Shia, by the way. It only became Shia in the 16th century after the Safavid invasion. Iran was 90% Shafi'i. Iran was 90% Shafi'i up to the 16th century. It was only after the Safavi invasion of Iran when the population was forced into Twelver Shiaism. This is an academic point for you to remember. Then Basra. There are people from Basra who narrated from Hisham. So what lesson do we learn here? Never trust anything you read on the internet without checking it with your scholars. Is that clear? Repeat after me. Never trust anything on the net unless you have checked it with a proper Muslim scholar. Because on the net, there are too many philosophers out there, too many self-made historians out there, too many thinkers, and too many chiefs and not enough Indians, as they say, yeah? Right? So you have to be very careful. Just because you have read a very eloquently written book or an eloquent speaker doesn't mean what he or she is telling you is true, right?
Everyone remember that at the end of this video. I do think he makes a good point here that you should do your own research. And yeah, if you're a Muslim, or even if you're someone who's not a Muslim and trying to learn more about the religion, you shouldn't just go to a bunch of websites that you found on Google and take what they say for granted as being completely accurate or reflective of Islam. You need to do a bit more research. I think the danger of going to a scholar is they're typically people who are very well versed in the defenses of Islam, and even with them, I'm not sure you're going to get the full true story. And so it's good. I'm not saying you shouldn't talk to scholars. Say if you're a doubting Muslim or someone looking to learn more about Islam, but you should also look to see what people who are criticizing Islam have to say. Not all of them are bigots, regardless of what someone like Adnan Rashid would say.
All of these accusations are embarrassing. A lot of this stuff you can find. Apparently, some very learned people will come out with this stuff. Just because they have read it, they go on the net, and the net is infested with inaccurate, unauthentic information. One of the things you will read on this report of Aisha is Hisham. Hisham is the only narrator. He's untrustworthy, therefore the report is not trustworthy. But that is not the case. When you go deeper into hadith science, you realize he's not the only. Then another idea these people who reject this report bring up is the age of Asma, the sister of Aisha. So they do a comparison and they say Asma was 27 years old or 17 years old. For that virtue, by that reasoning, Aisha could not have been what she was. Like she was not 9 at the time of the marriage, she was older. And all of these reports about Asma's age are untrustworthy, amazingly. So they will reject an authentic report, which the scholars of Islam unanimously accept. They have accepted it until the 19th century. And I will repeat, no classical Muslim scholar, listen to me carefully, no Muslim scholar up to the 19th century ever questioned these reports on the age of Aisha radiallahu anha. None. Not one. It was after colonialism, after the rise of liberalism and secularism in the Muslim world, when Muslims felt inferior in the face of secular and liberal and atheistic onslaught, when they started to compromise some of their literature and their values. This is what caused the questioning. Even in the Western world, the Prophet was never criticized for this, and we will see why. So it is now clear, brothers and sisters, this report cannot be doubted. Any of you who had these ideas before, that Aisha was older than 9, just to defend the Prophet against accusations of indecency and immorality, then let me tell you this now, you are wrong. There is no doubt that Aisha was 9 when the marriage was consummated. Prophet ﷺ had intimacy with Aisha when she was 9. And is that wrong? No. I'll tell you why. In today's world, yes. In today's world, it is, if someone did that today, everyone would be screaming, right? You would say, oh no, that's pedophilia, right? That's how people see it today. Because every single one of you has been conditioned. Every single one of us, we are born in a different age. We have different perceptions. We have different expectations from society. We have never seen a 10-year-old bride. Have you ever seen a 10-year-old bride? Tell me honestly, have you ever seen a 10-year-old bride? Anyone? If you went to a wedding and you saw a 10-year-old girl sitting in the place of the bride, and there's a 40-year-old man or 50-year-old man sitting next to her, getting married to her, what would you think? Honestly, tell me honestly. Sorry? Outrageous. Absolutely immoral, right? Today. You know why? Because all of you were born when? I'm assuming after 1950, yes? 1950? Unless there's someone 19, maybe 40. You're not gonna, I don't think anyone was born before 1900.
Okay, so this is a good point to stop and just, okay, so he basically just outlined what his rationale is. So he spent the first part just establishing that the ages are what they are according to Islamic tradition. And so his defense is, we just think those things are repulsive because of our social conditioning, because we live in this time. So it seems, before we get into this more, it seems like what he's saying is that Muhammad marrying a 6-year-old is not a bad thing. It's not immoral. It's just because we're living in this time and have been conditioned to look at it as immoral that we feel this way. It in of itself is not an immoral thing. And great point by Jackknife, just because we are conditioned, that doesn't mean it's a bad thing, which is a very great point, and we're going to expand on that a little bit more in a bit as he continues his argument. Coco Jasmine says child marriage is something to defend. Well, as we've already discussed, if we put Muhammad on this pedestal, then we have to defend it. We have no choice, really, whether it's changing the age of Aisha or finding some way to justify her being married to a man much older marrying someone who was much older than her when she was a 6-year-old child. All right. Music Guy says this guy should be a gymnast. Well, let's see how he does this for the rest of this roller coaster ride.
Anyone? No. If you were, then tell me what you eat. So all of us were born after the year 1900, when social values were changed. We grew up in an age where this is not seen. It's not normal. If you saw someone, for example, riding a camel to Johannesburg, what would you think? Tell me. Someone who wants to get, there are cars driving past. Yeah, there are jets, there are planes, right? And someone's on a camel, right? Riding a camel to Johannesburg or Durban, or the other, what's the other part of South Africa? The other side of South Africa. Or maybe Malawi, let's say Malawi, it's another country. Someone riding a camel to Malawi, you would think this person's mad, right? Unless he's doing some charity appeal or some, some kind of penance, right? Why? Times have changed. Expectations have changed. Now, let me shock you. What you will see now in due course may shock you. Because there were people before 1900, for them, a 10 years old bride was normal.
Okay, so what a weird comparison to make between child marriage and taking a camel instead of a car that we have today. So, as Shannon says, how whimsical, just like underage marriage. It's so bizarre because can you really compare something that's like just like a matter of practicality to something as important and as pivotal to a society and the relationships we all have as marriage? So the other question I bring up then is how do we distinguish between something that um, shouldn't be kept and something that should be kept? I hope this is something that Adnan Rashid addresses because I think this is one of the most important things that we should talk about. And a great question by Brother Ben, what's happened to objective morality then? Was it objectively wrong back then or not? We're going to see this, the answers to that question very shortly. All right, let's do it.
A 7 years old bride was normal. Hello, are you listening? A girl at 7 could be married legally. We'll see. So these people who attacked the Prophet ﷺ for doing something he did in the 7th century, which was normal for his time, are completely unaware of Islamic literature, Islamic history, Islamic morality, Islamic ethics. One. Second, they are also ignorant of human history. And we'll see how. Firstly, there is nothing from the Islamic history that the Qurayshis, the arch enemies of the Prophet ﷺ, ever used this as a slur against him, like Islamophobes today. What is the first thing the Islamophobes or the people who attack Islam use against the Prophet? First thing, number one, among many other things. Number one, what is it? Age of Aisha. Your Prophet married a 9 years old, right? Have you heard this before? Right. So from now on, from today onwards, you can tell them to go to books and get some education. Go and study. Because what you will see now will shock you as well. Believe me, it will shock you.
Why is he asserting that the people who are criticizing Muhammad for this are completely ignorant of the history? It's strange. Like I'm just speaking for myself as an ex-Muslim. I was aware that a lot of cultures had child marriage, that children got married very young. For example, in ancient Greece, it was not unusual for, say, a 30-year-old man to marry a 12-year-old or whatever. That's not. He seems to be obfuscating what the main issue is. The main issue is that Muhammad is supposed to be a role model for all Muslims and for all people. And what does it say when someone who's the role model is doing something that, by his own admission, we would find repulsive today? I think that's the key point, not some sort of ignorance about what other people were doing. No one is saying, or I should say, I'm not saying that Muhammad was worse than other people of his time. No, he was a man of his time, and that's what people did back then. But when we're elevating him to the status, this is why the criticisms come. How can he not see that? Is he avoiding this? I guess we'll find out.
Quraysh, no accusations. No eyelids were batted. The Qurayshis they called him a soothsayer or fortune teller. Yeah. Madman. What else? What else did the Qurayshis call him? Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. They used everything. They tried to tarnish his name by any means. Yes? Right? They uttered poetry about him. But never did any one of them say, why did you marry a 9 years old girl? Why did you marry? Are you a pervert? None of them said that to him. You know why? Because they had nothing, there was nothing wrong with it. It was a common practice. There is nothing from Islamic literature that tells us that. Okay, what about medieval critics? During the Middle Ages, medieval period, the Prophet was criticized in Europe. You know who waged the Crusades against the Muslims? Crusades. Crusades were waged from France, England, and Germany. Okay? What caused the Crusades? If we go by the traditional view, Pope Urban II in 1095 delivered a speech in a place called Clermont, and he encouraged the Christian knights in Europe who were fighting each other, killing each other, that why don't you unite and go and liberate the Holy Land from the infidels? Who were the infidels? Muslims, right? The Saracens, the infidels, go and liberate. And one of the ways those wars were justified was by attacking Islam and the Prophet of Islam. The Prophet of Islam was painted as one of the worst people who ever lived in the history of humanity by the European clergy at the time. Catholic monks writing on Islam, they lied on the Prophet. They said all sorts of things. And if anyone stood up to defend the Prophet, no, hold on a second, they were excommunicated. They were seen as troublemakers. That how dare you defend someone like Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? And this process continued well up as late as the 19th century, when some people actually said, enough is enough. You have lied enough against this man, and now we have to put the record straight. Muhammad was not sallallahu alaihi wasallam what you say he was. And we will see how that happened, right? So medieval critics never used this against the Prophet. Never. Why? Because it was perfectly normal about their societies as well. They were getting married to younger women, as young as 7, 8, 9, as we will see in due course. Okay? Is this something I made up? No. No. This is what historians, sociologists, anthropologists, all of them are telling you this, that this was the case throughout human history. That was the case up to the 19th century. And you will see the evidence. Then what about Renaissance authors? During the Renaissance in the 15th, 16th, 17th century, did any of them criticize the Prophet? They wrote about the Prophet, by the way. Because the Turks, the Ottoman Turks, were a huge source of fear for the Europeans. Europeans, during the Renaissance period, you know their biggest nightmare, what it was? The Ottomans, who were around the corner. They were very close. So because of the Ottomans, Europeans wanted to paint the Turks in a bad light. And how do you do that? By attacking the Prophet and the faith. So many Renaissance writers were writing on Islam and the Prophet and on the Ottomans. None of them criticized the Prophet ﷺ for marrying Aisha at 9. Okay? How about Enlightenment thinkers? Who are Enlightenment thinkers? People who wrote on the Prophet during the 18th century. The Enlightenment period is usually,
Oh boy. Okay, so in a sense, I feel like this section of the lecture is a waste of time because he's missing the point. So I think people watching, if you're watching, you can already guess where he's going with this. So people from this era didn't complain. They criticized Muhammad, but they didn't complain about this part of him marrying a child. They did it too. And he's just going to go on and on and on about that from different time periods. But as Brother Ben says, there's no answer to this point. And this point is that the fact that other people did it, other people contemporaries to his time period and after his time period, is irrelevant in a sense, because Muhammad is not an average person. He is the final messenger of God. He carries the wisdom and advice of God within him on all matters. And so when he does something, it is used, as I've repeated many times now, it is used as a template for what we should all be doing. So when Muslims see Muhammad marrying a child, despite what Adnan Rashid says that we would find that repulsive today, when we're looking at Muhammad doing it, then it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. And that's the important point. We're not holding Muhammad to the standards of other people, other cultures. He is the messenger of God. So really, this is kind of a waste of time of him going through all these time periods. Ali asks, I wonder if he thinks it's okay today. That's a very good question. And he does talk about that a bit at the very end. And so a lot of you have mentioned this thing about Adnan Rashid, the subject of slavery and Adnan Rashid's view on slavery. That I have to admit I'm ignorant about. So Omar Siddiqui says this issue is similar to slavery. Muhammad was a man of his time who owned and traded slaves, but by today's standards, it's repulsive and immoral. Jesus would be a better moral example for all time. I think I'm not going to get into this in this video, but I think there's some problems with using Jesus as a template for morality as well. I'm not going to do the whole game of comparing and contrasting Muhammad and Jesus, maybe another video. What matters to me most is the truth of the claims of those religions. I mean, if they're not true, then everything is suspect. Even if there are good aspects to it, there's also bad aspects to it. And I think that's something that Islam and Christianity both share. There's all kinds of bad stuff, and you have to take them with the good stuff that both religions offer. But all right, let's continue.
Considered to be the period between 1700 to the year 1800. This was the Enlightenment century, when many European philosophers were born and they wrote their philosophies the Europeans live by today, right? So who are the Enlightenment thinkers? Immanuel Kant, David Hume, for example, Isaac Newton, or John Locke, okay, Joseph Priestley, right, Adam Smith, Edward Gibbon, the author of The Decline and the Fall of the Roman Empire, Simon Oakley, all these people, some of them specifically wrote on the Prophet ﷺ. Gibbon specifically wrote a chapter, an entire chapter in his book. His book, The Decline and the Fall of the Roman Empire, was published between 1776 to 1788. 12 volumes were published, and he wrote chapter 50 covers the life of the Prophet, chapter 50 of his book. And he actually specifically mentions that Prophet married Aisha at 9, no criticism. No criticism. Nothing. Why? Because it was normal for them. They could imagine a 10-year-old bride. They could imagine a 9 and 8-year-old bride. They could. You cannot. If you went to a wedding today, as you all testified, right? If you went to a wedding today, but if you were alive in the 19th century, no problem, because their conditioning was different. Industrial Revolution during the 19th century, any criticism? No. No. Victorian England? No. There were many authors who were writing on the Prophet ﷺ during this period. Thomas Carlyle actually defended the Prophet. George Bernard Shaw wrote on the Prophet, no criticism. Okay. William Muir, who was a Christian missionary who wrote 4 volumes biography of the Prophet ﷺ in the 19th century, no criticism. Hardly anything he said about this. Right? He did not accuse the Prophet ﷺ of anything. William Blackstone, and we will see he was also an Enlightenment thinker, what he had to say. William Blackstone wrote commentaries on the English law in the 18th century, 1760s. 1760s, he wrote his commentaries on the English law, and you will see what he said about this issue. Then what about Orientalist historians? Some of them I've already mentioned. Prideaux, the one on the top, actually wrote a book specifically on the Prophet, to attack the Prophet. This book was published in 1697. When? 1697. And the title of the book is The Nature of Imposture, a Life of Mahomet, not Muhammad, Mahomet. This is how they spelt Muhammad in that age. So he wrote a book specifically to attack the Prophet, to prove in this book that Prophet Muhammad was an impostor, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was not a true prophet. And what did he say about this issue? He actually defended the Prophet. For marrying a 9-year-old, he defended. So a man who is attacking the Prophet in the book, He's defending the Prophet for doing it. Why? We'll see how. Simon Oakley wrote a biography of the Prophet as well. Partly, he wrote a history of the Muslims titled The History of Saracens, published in 1708. No criticism, right? Then we have Gibbon, Edward Gibbon, who already, I mentioned him already. Then Thomas Carlyle actually praised the Prophet. He stated that Muhammad is one of the most maligned figures in human history. People have unjustly, in particular European authors, throughout the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance period and into the Enlightenment period, they maligned him unjustly. In other words, these authors are lying against him due to their religious or philosophical prejudice. William Muir already mentioned. Then there were two very important Orientalists who produced a lot of work on Islam and Muslims.
All right, I think we got the gist of it, really, with this section. He's just going to keep providing examples of people who were from different eras who criticized Islam, but they didn't criticize Muhammad specifically for marrying someone that young. Brother Ben asked, wasn't she 6? Yes. So that's when the marriage, the betrothal happened. The consummation wasn't until she was 9, as Copycat says. Yes, thank you very much. And Music Guy brings this up. Wait till Europeans call the Middle Eastern region sodomites and boy lovers, since every well-off guy had a boy to love, and when Europeans would visit, they'd be offered young men, and they found this very odd. That I don't know about. What I think this point does bring up, though, that is probably very true, is I don't think we can definitively say that Muhammad never got any criticism whatsoever from anyone for marrying someone that young up until the 20th century, which is what Adnan Rashid's argument is. It's very possible that there were some cases where this argument was made against Muhammad. And Ali brings up this, whataboutism times 100. It really is a case of kind of deceiving your audience in a way, because, as we've already discussed, it's kind of missing the main point. The main point isn't that other people did it. It's that Muhammad had this elevated status and he should be held to a higher standard. So I'm going to just skip ahead here a little bit. Let's see. Okay. Let's take it from here.
Something crazy going on, right? Now watch. These are the quotes from historians dealing directly with this issue, how past societies worked pre-19th century, just over 100 years ago. Because you have all, we have confirmed that all of you have been born after 1900. What was happening before 1900? If people went to a wedding and they saw a 10-year-old bride, they wouldn't call the police. They would give a present to the bride and wish her well. Okay? How do we know this? Look. Margaret Wade Labarge, in her book, A Medieval Miscellany, she states on page 52, it needs to be remembered that many medieval widows were not old, important heiresses were often married between the ages of 5 and 10 and might find themselves widowed while still in their teens. Professor Richard Wortley and Professor Stephen Smallbone, in the book Internet Child Pornography, Causes, Investigation and Prevention, they state in medieval and early modern European societies, in medieval, and now you will understand why those authors I mentioned earlier, European authors, had nothing to say on this. In fact, they were defending the Prophet. You know why? This. In medieval and early modern European societies, the age of marriage remained low, with documented cases of brides as young as 7 years, although marriages were typically not consummated until the girl reached puberty. Shakespeare's Juliet was just 13. Now I'll stop there and ask you, imagine today wrote a play, a romantic play that involves a man and a woman, and the woman was 12. Would that play get published? Sorry? Why not? Huh? Why? Child abuse. It promotes child abuse, right? Because the definition of children or child has been changed in this century, previous century, in the 20th century. The definition of child was changed, right? But guess what? it is still not changed, as we will see in due course. It's still not changed, right? So Shakespeare's Juliet was 13, and there is no, imagine Shah Rukh Khan running in the field with a 12 years old. This came to my mind. I wanted to mention that. Imagine Daniel Craig, James Bond, going off with an 11 years old. Can you imagine? No. But Shakespeare was fine with it. Shakespeare was fine with it. Juliet is 13. And there is no hint in the play that this was considered to be exceptional. These academics are saying that. The situation was similar on the other side of the Atlantic. Bullough reports that case in 1689 of a 9-year-old bride in Virginia. At the start of the 19th century in England, it was legal to have sex with a 10-year-old girl. No problem. People would go to weddings where they would see a 10-year-old bride. Okay? This was going on throughout history up to the 19th century. All humans were doing it, right? So jump back to the 7th century anachronistically and use today's standard to judge a man in the 7th century. Is called anachronism. In history, it's called anachronism, right? It is unfair, it's unjust.
Is it unfair and unjust to do that with the Prophet Muhammad when Muslims are claiming that he's the messenger of God, that he got revelations from God himself, that he was this human who had all the possibly conceivable positive attributes that a man could have? Someone who is venerated in the Islamic tradition that is followed by nearly 2 billion people. Is it unfair to do that? Is it anachronism? The whole thing about Islam is that it's supposed to be for all time and for all times and all places. Apparently, this is an exception that Adnan Rashid and other Muslims are making. And yeah, fair points by some people with the whole Juliet example. 13 is twice as old as 6, mate. Yep. And good point by H. Romeo is almost the same age as her. That's also true. And Coco Jasmine, all humans were doing, and the perfect and mercy to mankind did it too. Yay. That essentially summarizes this whole point. It's kind of astounding, really. So clearly the approach that Adnan Rashid uses in his lectures, I mean, I've only seen this one, so I can't say all of them, but what he's doing here is he's bombarding us with all of these examples to hammer his point, while missing what I think is the key point, the important point. And so for all of you watching, have you noticed what's been missing in this elaborate description of all the cultures, all the time periods where the age of consent was low, was at the age of a child around 10 or 7 or whatever? What's missing? The thing that's missing is an explanation of why the change happened. Why did we, as a human society all over the world, make this transition and shift? And it was a gradual one too. It started before the 20th century, where even in the Victorian era, we started changing the laws and rules and started giving more rights to children. So why was this happening? What is the transformation that occurred where we reached to the point today where, as he said himself, we would be repulsed, we would be calling the police if we saw a child bride? So all Adnan Rashid has said so far is it's because of our conditioning. In a sense, everything he said since then has been filler. And so to spare you listening to more of the filler, I'm going to jump ahead towards the end, the last 15 minutes of the lecture, because you're going to just get the same thing in the next, what is it, like 20, 24 minutes or so. It's just the same thing repeating over and over again. All right.
Find answers. So why today? Why is this question being raised today? Why are people so shocked and so, awestruck by this today? The Prophet married a 9-year-old. Why today? A number of reasons. Colonialism. Colonialism came with this liberal and secular laws?
Of course, that's the only reason it could be. I am amazed that it's just colonialism. That's the first thing he says. So they came with their liberalism, their secularism, and their, like that pesky thing about caring for children's rights and all that. Ugh. And then we just let them oppress us. So I come from a Palestinian background. I'm not denying the horrible impacts that imperialism, colonialism had on big parts of the world. But the thing is, you can't just criticize everything, all of the ideas, all of the improvements that came from that part of the world, just because they also happened to be colonialists who oppressed big parts of the world. There were incredible advancements in science, in literature, in philosophy, in medicine, and in our understanding of humanity, what makes us tick, like how we develop, things like evolution, and beyond just things like child marriage, but like women's rights. A lot of that was instigated from the West, from the supposed evil colonialists. And this is a point that I think would be very awkward for someone from the West to make, someone from Canada or the UK or Germany or whatever. But I'm making this point. I'm a Palestinian making this point. There's a lot of positive things, a lot of positive ideas that came from that part of the world, and we can't just dismiss them because those countries also did terrible things. It's not black and white like that. We just can't do it. Liberalism, the devil is the enemy. Yeah, that's how it's kind of perceived. And so I'm not saying liberalism is perfect. I'm not saying liberal democracy or capitalism or whatever is perfect. And I think its problems are clearly obvious around the world. And it's one of the reasons why people are turning to Islam, because they just feel like their lives are empty with the shallow materialism that seems to be forced on all of us to pursue. Getting a job for money and all that. But we can't just demonize every single thing about it. Okay, so the first reason is colonialism. Let's hear the other reasons.
And people assume that these laws are the criteria to judge norm. No, they're not. Liberal secular laws are relative. They change with time. They change with place. They may change to anything. So we cannot regard them as the end or as the criteria or as the yard.
Sorry for interrupting again so quickly, but that's amazing. So the morality that comes from this liberal secular society, it can just change to anything. Like one day you can just go, it's a wrong to murder and rape. The next day it's gonna totally be okay. It's just, it's almost like he's describing it as if it's just tides or something. The tide will just go this way, or the wind will go that way, and that's how the morality of the liberal secular whatever society works. It just kind of goes wherever it wants. There's no reason behind it. There's no drive behind it. There isn't a tradition, centuries long tradition of thought and analysis and trying to not repeat the same mistakes as we've made in the past behind it. It's just, the social conditioning is just kind of going wherever it wants to go. And so there is one point of agreement I have with Adnan Rashid here. It's that I personally believe that all morality is subjective. I don't think there's any such thing as an objective morality that transcends us or that transcends all time and places. Like, morality has changed. It does shift, but there's reasons for that. Morality is built as a way, has always been built as a way for us to better navigate life, to create rules so that we can prosper more collectively and in some cases individually. And to say that there's no reason behind it, it can change to anything, is an ignorant statement that Adnan Rashid is making. It's very dismissive of all the things that humans have done to be able to reach this point. I'm not saying that today is perfect, but today we have so many more rights. So many more people have so many more rights than, at least, I don't know what happened before recorded history, but in the time of recorded history, I don't think there's ever been a case where as many people have enjoyed as many rights. There's still a lot of work to do, obviously. A lot of people who are being oppressed, a lot of rights that people should have that they're not getting. But we've made remarkable strides. and for him to dismiss it as, well, it might just end up being this thing tomorrow. No. And the thing is, too, Islam and any organized religion isn't exempt from this view that their morality is subjective. So Muslims will claim that their morality is objective, that it's that is for all time and all places, and it doesn't change. But that's not the case. I mean, if you just look at what Muslims do in practice, a lot of Muslims don't practice slavery. They don't practice child marriage, as Adnan Rashid just said. So there's many instances where you can see that Islam's morality has shifted and changed, and you can see it so much more in Christianity, because Christianity went through the process that Islam is going through right now much earlier. And by that, I mean the process of it being secularized and being neutered of its more damaging parts. Like, I still think Christianity is damaging in many, many ways, but it doesn't have as much of an impact as it did to a lot of people 200, 300, 400 years ago. Today, it doesn't have that much impact. Like, it does have that impact amongst many people, but not the breadth of impact that it used to have. And that's because society changed and our morality changed, and the religions were forced to adapt to survive. So even those religions don't have an objective morality. Brother Ben says $10 he's about to bring up Nazi Germany. Okay, I'll hold you to that bet. Let's see if he does.
Yardstick, as they say. Liberal secular laws are not the yardstick for humanity. Currently, they are dominant laws because the West is dominant. Culturally, politically, economically, the West is dominant. So we are all conditioned by that way of thinking, all of us. So we think everything has to measure up to the Western way of thinking. Everything has to measure up for it to be normal. Norm is being westernized. Even now, there are so many things we can look into. Liberal, secular, moral relativism is another reason, which I mentioned earlier. Mentally colonized Muslims. Muslims are put on the back foot because they're mentally colonized. And there are two reasons to be mentally colonized. Two reasons. They are completely ignorant of Islam and Islamic civilization and Islamic moral values and Islamic theology. And second, they know more about their colonizers than they do about the Prophet ﷺ and the history of Islam and history of humanity for that matter. That's why they're mentally colonized. It is very normal to be influenced by a civilization. Christian missionaries are spreading a lot of misconceptions and hate and lies about the Prophet of Islam deliberately. It started in the Middle Ages, is continuing to this day. There are very unpleasant, untrustworthy, abnormal people out there. Atheist extremists, they are extremists because they do not take human societies, the history of human societies into consideration when they attack Islam and the Prophet ﷺ.
So I suppose this one is targeted to people like me. I suppose he would describe me as an atheist extremist. And this accusation is categorically untrue for me and for many atheists, ex-Muslims, ex-Christians, whatever, that I know and I've met online just doing this channel and being on social media. It's not that many of us are aware that these were norms. That is not the point. And he's obfuscating this point. Like, it's such a key one. I mean, you can actually, if you just look, you can see the points of why saying that this issue is brought up today. So colonialism, liberal secular moral relativism, mentally colonized Muslims, Christian missionaries, atheist extremists, and then he's going to talk about his favorite topic, Islamophobes and hadith rejectors that he talked about in the beginning. Claudius. Oh, hi, Claudius. Glad you could join. Poor Allah and Muhammad defeated by colonization. No, this is just a temporary setback. Don't worry, they're going to ascend again with the help of Adnan Rashid's apologetics. So I think it's important to bring up here this key point. What is he missing? What is he omitting? I can't speak to whether he's doing it intentionally or not. But the reason this is brought up today is because for the past, I would say, more than 100 years, there's been this incredible movement to better understand not just child psychology, but human psychology, the development of children, their cognitive development, their physical development, their development of things like empathy. These were all things that were generally unknown or completely misunderstood, let's say 200 years ago, and definitely at the time of Muhammad. So it's outstanding that he doesn't mention this, because this is what instigated the changes, the shifts in raising the age of consent, in uh, making laws so children couldn't work in sweatshops, or that they worked shorter hours. Because yes, to his point, in the past, children were not treated that much differently from adults. They got married younger. They had responsibilities. A 10-year-old had responsibilities that a 10-year-old wouldn't have today. But that doesn't necessarily mean it was a right thing to do, and it was done out of ignorance of the cost, the impact on children. The thing that we've learned about children is that they're so sensitive to their environmental surroundings. How they're even treated by their parents can impact whether they become sociopaths later on in life. If you neglect a child in its first few years of life, there's a very high chance that they're going to become sociopaths, because they didn't properly learn empathy at that developmental stage. And it's something that is very hard to rectify or fix later on, once we pass that, once a child passes that certain age. And to say that the age of consent was changed and not explaining why, I think is a huge omission. The age of consent was changed because psychologists, scientists, doctors, you name it, realized that at the level of development, mental development, cognitive development, emotional development, that a child has at the age of 6, they can't possibly make the same kind of proper decision that someone who's 20 can make, or even younger, 16, 18, whatever. And that's why it's been changed. I mean, even in more recent times, we've discovered that the brain doesn't fully develop until, I think, like in the mid 20s. So that's mind-blowing new information that we've learned, and because of that information, we've adjusted how we treat our children. We've given children more rights. We've protected children from being exposed to certain kinds of environments, from being exposed to certain kinds of relationships, like marrying someone who's 50 years old when you're 6. And I just don't understand how he just doesn't mention any of this. And I'll leave it to you to kind of speculate. Is it intentional? Is he intentionally avoiding talking about this because it doesn't suit his argument? Or is he completely ignorant to this? I really don't know. Like, when it comes to these apologists, how much of it is self-deception and how much of it is willful deception of others while knowing the truth yourself, or at least knowing more information and not sharing it with the people you're trying to reach with these arguments? I, I really don't know. I feel like it's such an important point to make. And this is the reason why we're repulsed by these things today, because we understand what a child is like at 6. We understand their limitations. I don't think a child even fully develops the empathy of being able to understand someone else's perspective by the age of 6. And yet Aisha was supposed to be mature enough to make the decision to marry Muhammad at that age. And just remember, so in this context of her marrying him, he is the revered leader of her entire community. Her parents are for this marriage, and she's told that it's a great honor to be married to Muhammad. And she's grown up in this world. What do you think she's going to do? Can she truly make a proper, thought out decision in such an environment? It's absurd to think that she could. And I don't buy the arguments, and I think Adnan Rashid does make this argument in a little bit, that, oh, well, children were different back then. They were more mature and they had more of an intellectual understanding because they had to go through more. No, I don't buy it. That's a nonsense argument, because as much as our experiences impact us, they can't impact our emotional cognitive development to that extent. These are physical changes we're going through, and we have to reach certain ages to get to them. As Music Guy says, it's cherry picking. Yeah, completely. And Copycat, so I was right about that. So the brain finishes at 25, around then. So this is information that people didn't have back then, and that's why it changed. And Adnan Rashid seems to not be interested in that.
Islamophobes and hadith rejectors, all of these people are guilty of the same, in not so many words, they are guilty of the same problem. Now, is it pedophilia? Technically speaking, even by today's standard, is it pedophilia? First of all, it cannot be, because otherwise all of humans are pedophiles. Do you agree? Pre-19th century, every single Victorian gentleman walking with a stick and hat, like that, in London, was a pedophile, right? Potentially William Blackstone was a pedophile. All the kings, all the Victorian thinkers, including all those who wrote on the Prophet and didn't criticize him, they were all pedophiles. Every single person who believed in these laws, Thomas Jefferson, Adam Smith, George Washington, right? All the major thinkers, Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, right? Galileo, all the popes, everyone, every single human, because they had no problem with it. If there were problems, they would write books on it, right? Produce one form of literature. Victorians wrote hundreds of thousands of volumes, and they published millions of books. Victorian England was very ripe with literature, very, very rich period. Victorian England. Produce one book or one pamphlet or one leaflet where someone actually wrote something on it, that this is too young, man. This is too young. No, none of them. Nothing. So what is the definition of a child? Pedophilia actually means pedophilia. Pedophilia is a Greek term. Philia means love. Pedo means child. So literally translated, it means child love. Technically, it means a person who wants to have sex with children, right? It's a crime. It's a crime today. But if it means having sex with children, what is a child according to the Oxford University? A child is a young human being below the age of puberty. Is that clear? A child, according to the Oxford University, Oxford Dictionary, a child is a young human being below the age of puberty or below the legal age of majority. Right? That's the first definition. Right. Let's see now, by today's standard, what is puberty? A child is someone who reached puberty. On the National Health Service website, British National Health Service, NHS, on their website, this is how puberty is defined. Puberty is when a child's body begins to develop and change as they become an adult. When do they become an adult? Girls develop breasts and start their periods. Boys develop a deeper voice and facial hair which start to appear. The average age for girls to begin puberty is 11, while for boys, the average age is 12. Now it makes sense why in the past they had such lower ages, 10, 11, 12, even 7. 7 is, I think, extreme, right? But average was 10, 11, 12. 10, 11, 12 in human societies generally, right? Why? This is why, because by that age, girls would usually reach puberty, right? But it's different for everyone. So don't worry if your child reaches puberty before or after their friends. It's completely normal for puberty to begin at any point from the ages of 8 to 14. The process can take up to 4 years. So biologically, scientifically, someone who reached the age of puberty cannot be technically called a child according to these definitions. But I do understand that legal systems see it differently. They define child differently. A child is depending on what the age of consent in a given country is. It may be 16, it may be 14, it may be 17, 18, depending on the country you live in. And this is why those countries, the laws have to be considered, they have to be followed. And this is why people would not get married to girls given the age of consent in that country. They would not get married to anyone younger than that age of consent today, right? But you cannot use the current legal system as the yardstick to condemn the entirety of humanity that lived before the 19th century or before the year 1900, actually before the 20th century. So I'll repeat, you cannot use the current legal systems and the age of consent they define to condemn the entirety of humanity before the 20th century. Do you agree? Okay.
So again, like look how he's forcing this framing of it. So aside from the pedophilia thing, so I did talk about that in the beginning of the stream. So I agree with him there. You can't say that Muhammad was a pedophile because solely from the fact that he married Aisha when she was 6 years old. And the reason for that is for the reasons he explained pretty well, that we can't conclude that he was primarily or exclusively attracted to prepubescent children. He likely did it for the reason why a lot of people from all sorts of cultures did it, for political alliance reasons, to tie the family of Aisha's family to his family. And it was a way of showing respect to offer your daughter in marriage. And it's a way of honoring each other. And he married women, many other women who were older. He even married a woman who was older than him. So I can't. I disagree when Muslims say that he was a pedophile, and I think it's actually damaging to the cause of shedding light on the problems of Islam to say that Muhammad was a pedophile, because that just, it's, first of all, it's not true, and also just aggravates Muslims unnecessarily. What we should say, and here there's a clear distinction, that Muhammad was a flawed person from a time when there was a flawed understanding of children, of the nature of humanity, of the nature of our development. And this is true of many people from many eras up to very recent in human history. I'm not condemning them by saying that. So I'm saying for their time period, it seemed like not a problematic thing to do. And that's because they probably didn't realize the harmful impacts. And it definitely must have had harmful impacts that they didn't properly understand. And this is not just when it comes to child marriage, in so many ways. If you want to just talk about slavery and other things like that, there's a lot of things that we did that were terrible and we didn't understand they were terrible. That doesn't mean I'm condemning those people. And definitely not saying that they're all pedophiles. What's important to note is Muhammad should be held to a higher standard. And let's see what some people say in the comments. Great point by Copycat. He's acting like that happens overnight, like when it comes to puberty. And that's a great point. And also 6 is so far from normal starting puberty, which is a good point. So the way it works with Muhammad is that he waited until Aisha reached puberty at the age of 9 before he consummated the marriage. Not defending Muhammad. I still think what he did was a problematic, terrible thing. I just don't think we can say that he's a pedophile. Let's see what other comments we've got here. Coco Jasmine says Aisha was groomed and her father and family failed her because they didn't know better. Grooming is a tough word, but like when you look at all of the factors that I described earlier, it's hard to not say that she was groomed. And yes, that's the key point. They didn't know better, but when they're the first Muslims, the guides that we all should have in life today, I feel like they should have known better, shouldn't they? Ah, it's really sad. Yeah. And Copycat says, now to be fair, it's pretty obvious his first wife was an arrangement and she kept him in check. Yeah, true. And Aisha says, this is hard to listen to. Regardless of when they used to marry, it doesn't justify marrying someone old enough to be her father. So again, this was the norm back then. Not justifying it, but this was the norm. They didn't see the problems that we see with it today. But what Adnan Rashid is missing, and I think a lot of Muslims are missing, there's reasons why we have problems with it today. And those reasons are built on evidence. Like, we understand the development of children so much better now, which is why we don't let those things happen anymore, or we try to anyway, as much as possible. And it seems like he's not going to address this.
So now when someone comes to you and tells you the Prophet married 9 years old Aisha, what would your response be? Sorry? It was normal for the time. And then they will ask you to prove it. And then what will you do? Take them to the sources and tell them, go and read the histories, social histories of humanity. Pick up any book and see the ages of consent, even in Britain. One convenient reference you can give is this one, William Blackstone, Commentaries on the Big English Law. Remember this, William Blackstone, Commentaries on the English Law. The legal age of marriage is 7 in England, as late as 1867. That's it. Okay. So to summarize everything, number one, hadith of Aisha is not untrustworthy. It is authentic. There is no doubt that Aisha said what she said. She was 9 when the Prophet consummated marriage. So you don't need to throw away the baby with the bath water, right? You don't need to do away with your literature, your hadith literature. It is powerfully preserved. Do not doubt any hadith of Bukhari that comes with a chain. Any hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari with a chain, do not doubt it and don't try to water it down. Don't start to change it because you don't know how to defend it. You don't know what the context is. You don't know what the commentaries are. You don't have the knowledge to understand it. If you are finding it difficult to fathom, then it's your knowledge. It's your lack of knowledge and intellectual ability to understand it. There's nothing wrong with the literature, right?
Oh boy. That's probably the worst thing he said in this whole lecture. I can't believe it. I actually just want to go back and hear him say that again. I can't believe he said that.
As late as 1867. That's it. Okay. So to summarize everything, number one, hadith of Aisha is not untrustworthy. It is authentic. There is no doubt that Aisha said what she said. She was 9 when the Prophet consummated marriage. So you don't need to throw away the baby with the bath water, right? You don't need to do away with your literature, your hadith literature. It is powerfully preserved. Do not doubt any hadith of Bukhari that comes with a chain. Any hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari with a chain, do not doubt it and don't try to water it down. Don't start to change it because you don't know how to defend it. You don't know what the context is. You don't know what the commentaries are. You don't have the knowledge to understand it. If you are finding it difficult to fathom, then it's your knowledge. It's your lack of knowledge and intellectual ability to understand it. There's nothing wrong with the literature, right?
So that just perfectly sums up what the problem with Islam is in many ways. So if you're struggling to fathom something within the Islamic tradition, something Muhammad did, for example, like marrying a 6-year-old, and you don't know how to justify it, you don't know how to defend it, the problem isn't with Islam, it isn't with Muhammad, the problem is with you. You just haven't read enough. You haven't done the proper research. You haven't talked to the proper scholars, the ones who've spent their entire careers trying to figure out rationalizations for this kind of stuff. You're the problem. And this is what keeps people within Islam. When they see things like this, they think, oh, this feels wrong, but this doubt and this wrong feeling is my problem. I have to figure this out and figure out some kind of way to make it make sense. And this is something I went through as a Muslim. I did this constantly, so many things. And this is truly the damaging part of a religion like Islam. When it's also part of your identity, you don't want it to be wrong. You want it to be right. And so when you have, and then the self-loathing begins, the guilt begins. As Brother Ben says, sorry, babe, it's you, not me. Islam is perfect, Muslims are flawed. Exactly. Yeah. And I just makes the great point. I meant it shouldn't be justified by error, considering Islam is for every era. You don't understand how they're missing that point. Yeah. So he does address something a little bit about this at the very end. And let's see what Copycat says. They can't argue this because our whole point is they claim he's divine and they claim his marriage to Aisha is a product of his time. Those two things can't coexist. If divine, he should have known. So here's the thing. So Muslims don't consider Muhammad divine. They do consider him just as a man. But in practice, they essentially treat him like he's divine, which Muslims will say is wrong. But when they revere things he said and the things he did, and when you have to, just drawing a picture of him, as we know very well, create so much anger and uproar, he really is. Let's say he's elevated to this status that is above normal humans but beneath God. So in that sense, yes, he is upheld to the standard, and so he should know better than do things like that. But he doesn't.
And you saw a demonstration of that today. Do you agree? Okay. So, are we obliged to do it today? Are we obliged to get married to 9 years old? Because some people will now come back, having heard all of that, they will say, but your Prophet is a model for you until eternity. He is Rahmatul lil Alameen. He is a mercy for all the worlds, and you have to follow him until the day of judgment. So you should be getting married to 9 and 10 years old girls. No.
Isn't it amazing that it took him this? I think there's like about 10 minutes or maybe even less left in the lecture. It took him this long to get to this point, which I think is the main point of the reason why people criticize that Muhammad did this. It's astounding. And as Coco Jasmine says, they never address the notion of Muhammad being perfect. More example in the case of Aisha's age and maturity. So Adnan Rashid does do it here in a second. Kafir makes a great point that Adnan Rashid speaks like a politician. He uses fear, for example, describing the extreme atheists, the Christian bigots that are coming for you, and you have to defend Islam from their attacks. Exactly. If you have to use fear to control your audience, you know it's rotten somewhere beneath. Exactly. Why does it have to come from this adversarial place of being defensive and attacking the people who criticize Islam? It's very un-Muslim, I would say, actually, from the Islam that I was taught. And I did want to save this one comment from Rashid White. I want to change my answer to the poll. So there is a poll, by the way, for people who weren't here in the very beginning, basically asking you, were you convinced by Adnan Rashid's argument? So Rashid, I think, is being a bit facetious, joking around a bit. I think Adnan destroyed the haters and going to revert back to Islam and move to Afghanistan to marry some 9-year-old woman. I was such a fool to disbelieve. Well, I hope you're joking. I think you are. But yeah, like that's the key point, and he's only getting to it at the very end. So let's hear what he has to say.
No, because we tell them our Prophet rode camels to Makkah. And if
again with this camel riding camels comparison. So it's so weird. Like there's a difference between the ways we should conduct our lives morally and practical things like we have cars now, or we have electric toothbrushes, or we have, I don't know, you get my point. We have ways of purifying water and we should use those. That is not the point in this matter. When we're talking about things like child marriage, these are things that are supposed to be guides for all times and all places for us to know what to do in these situations. To know, can we marry someone? Like, how young can we marry someone? What should we do when it comes to moral quandaries or things that are considered sins? Having a camel, not using a camel and driving a car today has nothing to do with that. This is a false comparison that he's making here.
if we did that today, our Prophet would be telling us, are you mad? If the Prophet was here today, do you think he would choose to go on camel? If the Prophet wanted to go for Hajj in 2019, he was in Cape Town. If he happened to be in Cape Town, we're not so fortunate to have him among us. But Allah has blessed us with other things. You know, Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, my brothers who will come after. And the Sahaba said, Ya Rasulullah, the ones who were around him, are we not your brothers? He said, you're my companions. But those people who will come after me, they haven't seen me, and yet they will love me and they will believe in me. They are my brothers. Allahu Akbar. And a good one of them will have the reward equal to 50 good ones of you. Can you imagine, brothers and sisters, the fact that we don't have his company, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but that doesn't mean we cannot have the reward and the honor to love him and to be with him on the day of judgment or after we die, right? And there are many ways to do it. One of the ways is to care for an orphan. Ana wa kafil yatim fil jannah ka hatain. The Prophet said, I and the one who takes care of an orphan will be in paradise like this. You can be with the Prophet after you die on the day of judgment, taking care of her. My mother-in-law died just yesterday, rahmatullahi alayha, and I'm traveling to London tonight I had to cut my trip short, but alhamdulillah, most of the work is done. My lectures are finished now. So she took care of orphans. Specifically, we know a family. They were orphans. She bought a house for them. She put the entire family in the house. She's not here today, so I'm not showing off for her. I'm not the one doing it, so there's no showing off, right? She did it. So I'm telling you this to encourage you. And wallahi, there are signs we can see that that was a special woman. The amount of condolences and the amount of prayers coming our way from all around the world is unbelievable. The amount of acceptance Allah gave her. She died in Ramadan. She was fine walking around. I left her 2-3 days ago in London, walking around. I spoke to her, smiling, walking. And
How did we get to this detour? He's saying something about how Muslims should do good deeds today. I mean, if it's caring for orphans, I guess I have no problem with that, but I don't see the relevance exactly.
before Ramadan, doctors have said you will die soon, right? And she was walking around. We thought she may take 3 months, 4 months, but in Ramadan, this is how she deteriorated. As if Allah wanted to take her in Ramadan. Allah wanted to, because she was special. So Rasulullah ﷺ told us, he gave us these incentives, and she took advantage of one of them, orphans. And I believe, inshallah, if that deed is accepted, that alone will take her to Jannah. Ameen, inshallah. That alone will take her to Jannah. So we're not obliged to do it today, because the Prophet, it is the same Prophet, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who taught us to be sensitive of the cultural norms of the people you live with. How? There's a report from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I have to end very soon so that we can take some questions and when leave for the airport. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to Aisha radiallahu anha in Makkah that, "Oh Aisha, if it was not for your people," who? Aisha's people. Who were they? They were also the Prophet's people, Qurayshis. So he's making a point here. If it was not for your people, Aisha, your tribe, Quraysh, I would bring the door of the Kaaba down. At the moment, where is the door? It's 7 feet above, right? Yes? The Prophet wanted to bring the door down, but he didn't do it. He didn't do it. Why? Why? It was perfectly halal for him to do it. He wanted to do it, but he abstained. Why? To avoid controversy. To avoid unnecessary controversy, because if he tried to do it, the Meccans, the Qurayshis, they would have had a problem with it. So Prophet knew his situation well. He said, Aisha, if it wasn't for your people, I would have brought the door of the Kaaba down. Right? So what lesson do we learn from this? Maslaha and mafsada. The concept of maslaha and mafsada, that when you live in a society, you have to consider their norms. You have to be very insensitive. Right? Not everything the Prophet ﷺ did is sunnah. Not everything he did was sunnah. It may be for that time, for that specific situation. Sunnah is something he did consistently, continuously. Yes, he did certain actions to highlight that it is perfectly halal to do it. So if you were to get married, like previously Muslims did, to younger women, as soon as they hit the age of puberty, the Prophet was defining what is halal and what is haram. So the Prophet ﷺ came to highlight, to clarify what is halal and haram. So when Jibreel came to determine the times of salah, what did he do? He came at the early time and he came at the latter time. Only for Maghrib he came one time. So Jibreel did this for what reason? So that Muslims can understand there's an early time for each and every single salah, and there's a latter time. You have to pray your salah within that time, right? Likewise, the Prophet ﷺ was sent as a model. لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. Right? So he came as a model. So he married a very, not very, but an older woman than himself. Khadija radiallahu anha, she was older than him, right? She was not, of course, she was young for her age at that time, 40 years old, and Prophet ﷺ was 25. So here he is teaching his ummah that it is perfectly valid, perfectly fine for you to get married to older women, right? Likewise, he got married to Aisha as soon as she reached that age of puberty, 9, okay? So that he can highlight for his ummah that this is the minimum. This is the minimum, that's the maximum. But do we have to do it today? No, we don't have to do it today.
Okay, so lots to unpack here. Brother Ben, I'll explain in a second. So it's very strange. So Adnan Rashid keeps on saying that you don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but what he's doing is he's essentially trying to have his cake and eat it too, to use another phrase. So what he's saying is that, first of all, it is permissible, it is halal to marry someone, marry a child once they hit puberty, even if they're 9 years old or whatever. That Muhammad's example is a way of showing us the range of of ages we can marry. But he's also saying that we should respect the norms of the culture that we live in. So to Elsa's question, was he arguing that Muhammad would not make the same decision on marrying Aisha if he lived in this time? So I think he is saying that. So it was the norm at the time, but it isn't now, and we have to respect the laws of the country we are in, and we have to, following Muhammad's example of things he did when he was alive, we have to respect the society we're in and follow their rules. So that's complete and utter nonsense, because how can you build a religion on that? And is that how Islam is preached and practiced anyway? So just think about it. So practice your religion, practice Islam as you see fit, practice the commands of God in the Quran, things like not drinking, and so on and so forth. But if there are things that are norms in the society or the time that you live in, you should respect those as well. So while marrying a child as young as 6 is totally okay, you shouldn't do it because that's not what is acceptable today in our culture. But then where do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line in that? How do you know what things of your religion, of Islam, you should still do, and things that you should stop doing because they're not culturally appropriate anymore, or they're looked down on? And if that is the yardstick we're following, then we're just following society's norms. So the liberal secular morality that he thinks is just flip-floppy and it can just end up anywhere. That's what he's saying Muslims should follow. And if parts of Islam don't fit with those things, then they shouldn't do them. That is exactly what he's saying. And in that sense, this is not what a lot of Muslims do, and this is not what a lot of Muslims believe. But this is something that a lot of reformer Muslims or progressive Muslims, or whatever you want to call them, do think. Because, and this is my suspicion, I'm not saying this about Adnan Rashid or anyone else, they see the problems with Islam. They see the problems that come from it originating from a society from 1400 years ago, and from it lacking a proper understanding of certain things that we consider immoral and moral today. And one of those things is marrying a child. And to find a way to reconcile that, they adopt this weird, nonsensical argument that I'm not even sure how you would implement that. Is this something that you should, as an individual Muslim, implement and figure out what you should be doing? This thing people don't do anymore, but this thing is part of Islam. I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to practice this anymore. But this thing, I will. So where do you draw the line? This is the problem when we're trying to use Islam as a guide to our lives, and he's saying we should just be following the cultural norms. Then what's the point of Islam? Let's just discard it and follow the cultural norms. What is the thing that we're preserving from Islam? How are we preserving Islam? If anything, we're just changing it and modifying it so it can fit into the norms and values and the conditioning of our time. So it makes no sense. As Brother Ben says, this is moral relativism. Well, I think it's just like a way of trying to make Islam survive. Because, as he said, people would be repulsed if you had a 10-year-old bride. But he's saying it's okay. So if you went ahead and had a 10-year-old bride, just go ahead and do it. It's totally halal. And yet somehow he's also saying that you shouldn't do it because this is not the rule of culture. It makes no sense to me. Copycat says, by that logic, they should drop their religion entirely. Bad argument for a Muslim to use. Well, that's the thing. It's like a slippery slope. If you follow this argument that he's presenting all the way to its natural conclusion, if you just follow the standards of logic and reason and the scientific process that's shown the many problems of Islam, then we should just drop it. Why are we preserving this thing? Because it's tradition, it's culture, it's protecting us from the way of the West, the colonial oppressors that we have to respect anyway. And there's a question I want to ask. I really want to ask Adnan Rashid. So I think he mentions at some point in the video, I might have skipped over that part, that he has young children. Would he accept his 10-year-old, if he had a 10-year-old daughter, to get married? It's totally halal. And if he wouldn't accept it, why wouldn't he accept it? Because it's just not the social conditioning and norm. You're a Muslim. Islamic tradition of Muhammad himself says it's okay. So you should see that it's okay too. Why are you saying that it's a problematic thing? If you're saying it's because of the social conditioning, then you're failing as a Muslim, because Islam is for all times and places. Yeah. I don't see any way around that from what he's saying.
Because expectations, social norms have changed, so we don't have to ride camels today. Yeah, we don't have to, draw water from wells today, right? You can do that right today. Yeah. How many would you do that today? Go. You need water? Go and draw water from well. Because
again, I have to make this point. This is such a false comparison. Comparing where we get our water from or how we transport ourselves is a completely different thing. These are matters of simple practicality. What we're talking about is the rules on which we should live our lives by, the moral standards. These are completely different. Nice try, but I'm not buying it, and I hope you aren't buying it either. And I hope the Muslims watching it aren't buying it. Elsa says it very well. He's confusing norms of modernity. And again, this brings up the question, is he intentionally doing it, or is he self-deceiving? I don't know.
In the time of the Prophet, so you love the Prophet so much that you want to do it like that, right? The Prophet would tell you, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you, right? Prophet ﷺ moved with the times. He taught us to move with the times. We do not change our morality. We do not change our ethics. We do not abandon our literature, our theology, but we move with the times and we consider the norms of the times we live in and the people we live with. Thank you.
How did he make those two things fit? As Nocebo effect says, straight contradictions. Let's hear it one more time if we can. I'm just going to go back a little bit.
Yeah, we don't have to, draw water from wells today, right? You can do that right today. Yeah. How many would you do that today? Go. You need water? Go and draw water from well. Because in the time of the Prophet, so you love the Prophet so much that you want to do it like that, right? The Prophet would tell you, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you, right? Prophet ﷺ moved with the times. He taught us to move with the times. We do not change our morality. We do not change our ethics. We do not abandon our literature, our theology, but we move with the times and we consider the norms of the times we live in and the people we live with. Thank you so much for listening. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen.
And we come to the end. So he ends with what seems like I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. A complete contradiction. So we don't have to change our religion. We don't have to change our traditions. We don't have to change our ethics, but we have to move with the times and respect the different norms and values of the cultures that we live in. How can it be both? I'm trying to figure out a way in which he's trying to make this work. Can someone explain this to me? Because I don't understand it. So it's okay to marry a 6-year-old, but you shouldn't do it because people would frown upon it today. So I guess what he's saying is it's not wrong, but you shouldn't do it just so you don't piss people off. But where do you draw the line? That's the part where I'm just lost. Where do you draw the line on what things you can practice of your religion and what things you just don't? And it's not even like a case of not practicing them. It's just believing that you can do them and feeling that you can do them, but just not doing them. So in that sense, you're not going with the times either. It's a really weird argument. And Rashid says, personally, I don't think Adnan believes what he's saying. He's in the West talking to Western Muslims that are disgusted with child marriage. He'd say anything to them to keep them in the fold of Islam. So I don't know. None of us know what's going on in his mind. From what I've seen of him, he does seem well-intentioned, and he does seem like he's coming from a place where he's trying to help Muslims while being completely ignorant of the damage that he's causing with these sorts of arguments, because it's such a conflicting message. So he's telling Muslims, whether they live in the West or other parts of the world, you can marry a 9-year-old if she happens to have reached puberty at that age. It's totally okay, but just don't do it if the region you're in frowns upon that sort of thing. Of course, what's missing is, why has it changed? Why is it so repulsive now? Is it really just this thing that, oh well, the morality of liberal secularism just kind of goes here and there? Or are there legitimate reasons? Are there legitimate reasons that maybe you wouldn't want your own daughter to, if she's 10 years old, to marry a man who's 4 times her age or more? Is there a reason for that? That's what I want to ask him. And I want to hear his answer to that question. Why would you not want to do it? Well, Muhammad said it was okay, so why don't you? Because it's wrong. Because we know it's wrong. We've learned that it's wrong. Just because we didn't always know that it's wrong, that doesn't mean that we don't know that it's wrong today. And just because it's possible that there's a future where, I don't know, we have some sort of apocalypse, and then where things like rape and slavery and child marriage become normal and okay again, that doesn't mean that we are wrong about saying that it's wrong. We have very good reasons for saying that it's wrong. And he's completely neglected those in this entire lecture by just focusing on, oh, it's attacks from bigots, it's attacks from Islamophobes and atheist extremists. I mean, it's hard not to conclude that he's being disingenuous, but we don't really know. And yeah, so that's all I have to say about this. Ali makes a great point. Then we should throw out hudud laws and the hijab as well. Most people don't like those things. But again, here's the thing. Where do these people draw these lines? Who are we supposed to listen to if we are Muslims within the Muslim community? One Muslim will say one thing, one Muslim will say another thing, and then, I mean, Islam is already so fragmented as it is, and then it's just going to keep fragmenting further. And honestly, I think that is the process that we're seeing with Islam, especially in the West, where Muslims are realizing that there's a lot of parts of their religion that don't really square to what they can see is immoral or moral. And they're just finding ways of picking and choosing and cherry picking. And this is a phrase I use a lot about Muslims. A lot of Muslims today are cherry picking, pick and choosers. They pick the parts that they like, they ignore the parts that they don't like, even when the parts that they're ignoring are ironclad parts of the Islamic tradition. Yeah. Elsa says, norms change because ideas on morality changes. I don't see any way that they are not related. Exactly. Yeah. So the norms are built on morality, and they're not just practical matters like, oh well, you can take a car now instead of a camel. That is a norm as well, but it's one that's practical. It's not to do with the social fabric of how we treat each other. It just isn't. So let's take a look at the poll results. Let's see how many people voted. Okay, so 100%, so 34 votes. Thank you for everyone who voted. So I don't think I can show the poll, but you can take a look at it in the live chat. So unanimous, 100% said no. They were not convinced by Adnan Rashid's defense of Muhammad's marriage to Aisha, and 0% said yes. rare to have a completely unanimous vote about something like this. So I think I've pretty much covered everything I have to say about the topic. There was one comment from Friendly Muslim. I'm not sure if you're still there, Friendly Muslim. When I mentioned the whole thing about how we've learned that um, the brain doesn't fully develop until the age of 25 or the mid 20s, whatever it is. Do I feel that the age limit should now be increased to 25? This is regarding marriage. No. So that's the thing about human development. There's a lot of stages of human development from the moment we're born up until this age of 25, as we've learned through scientific research. And I think in the middle of all those stages, or at some point in those stages, I think it's fair to say that we can consent to something like a marriage. Once we've reached a certain level of cognitive development, emotional development, empathy development, that it's safe for people to make those kinds of decisions. I'm not saying that they're always going to make the right decisions. And sure, there are some ways that they're not developed as much as someone who's, say, 30 or 40. But there's a big difference between someone who's 25 and someone who's 6 or 10 or even 15, 16. Developmentally, even if it's not that much of a physical difference. But there are big physical differences too. So I would not say that we should just have everyone marrying at the age of 25, no. But yeah, so if anyone wants to ask me any questions about this topic or anything else, I noticed that there's a few new faces here. I'd love to answer some questions. So yeah, Friendly Muslim, I just answered your question. And again, I respect your point, Friendly Muslim, that Adnan Rashid doesn't speak for all Muslims. I'm not saying that he speaks for all Muslims, but I hope you agree with me that it's fair to say that a lot of Muslims share the same sorts of ideas and make the same sorts of arguments that Adnan Rashid did. So they trust the accounts of the hadith in Sahih Bukhari, and from that they conclude that Muhammad did marry someone that young. And my question to you is, like, if you found out, let's say, hypothetically speaking, you found out somehow that it is factually true that Muhammad married someone who was 6 years old, would that change your view on Islam? Just kind of out of curiosity, I would love to know. But let's see other people in the comments. Copycat, hi Copycat. I like how your books are color coded. Yeah, it's pretty cool, eh? I thought it would be an interesting way to have a more colorful background than just a green screen thing, or I don't know, just this blank wall. So I'm glad you like it. And let's see if we have any questions or comments. Abdurrahman says, we would not use camels to travel between places as we have better and faster means of communication. Likewise, Muhammad's practices are outdated and immoral by now. It's hard not to come to that conclusion. And again, I'm not saying Muhammad was an evil person because of this specific thing. I think he did a lot of flawed things and bad things in the course of his life that I'm not going to get into this video. But specifically speaking about the marriage to Aisha, I can't say that we can conclude that he's a bad person. But if he's supposed to be our guide to life, our moral standard, then it's a complete and utter failure. Yeah. And yeah, looks like we don't have any questions. So unless anyone wants to ask me any last questions, I can just end the stream. And I really appreciate so many people coming and just sharing their input and watching that lecture with me. I was kind of dreading talking about this because it really is an aggravating issue for Muslims, and I want to be careful that I don't misrepresent what is the case with Muhammad, for example, of the whole issue of pedophilia, while also outlining what are the legitimate problems with what Muhammad did. Because the problem really is, and I think it is legitimate, that there is anti-Muslim bigotry that exists in the world. And I would even use the word Islamophobia. I don't have a problem with using that word. So we can't allow Muslims to muddy the waters of any criticism of Islam by them lumping us in altogether. The bigots with people who have legitimate concerns and criticisms. Just because you're criticizing Islam doesn't mean you're a bigot. Doesn't mean it's coming from a place of hate. So many people in my family are Muslim. So many people from my country of origin, Palestine, are Muslim. And I don't care about the reality that a lot of them would be very mad at me if they knew that I was doing this. And in a sense, I don't even care about the fact that I am doing this anonymously, and I know that I could face some repercussions in my personal life and maybe even my career if people knew I was saying this kind of stuff. I think the point still needs to be made that there is a space for legitimate criticism of Islam. So thank you so much, Happy Camper. Happy Camper says, thank you for the stream. It really helps. I'm glad it was useful to you. Coco Jasmine's asking more Adnan. So Coco, you brought up a lot of stuff about Adnan's defense of slavery in Islam. I think I can take a guess what he probably says about it. There's a lot of Muslims who defend it by saying that the slavery in Islam was a necessity because of prisoners of war, and it was different from the slavery that we think of today. For example, the transatlantic slavery of the U.S., of taking slaves from Africa and bringing them to the U.S. And I think it might be interesting to talk about that as well. So I'll definitely consider it in the future. Brother Ben asks, what's your name? So I don't use my real name on this channel. I just go by Secular Spirit or Alim. So you feel free to call me either of those things. I might, you know what, I might just reveal my real name and stuff. I was at some point in the future. I'm definitely hesitant about it. For security reasons and for reasons I think anyone who's ex-Muslim can understand if you're watching. Friendly Muslim asks, would you do a call-in review about this episode? So do you mean you'd want to call in to just discuss it potentially? Let me know if that's what you mean in the chat. And by the way, Friendly Muslim, I did ask you a question of if you found out that Muhammad 100% without a doubt got married to Aisha when she was 6, would that make you change your view on Islam? I'd really love to hear your opinion on that, because I've seen you in Apostate Aladdin's videos and other places as well. I think in a few of my videos too, and I don't know much about you, so I'd love to know more about what you think about those things. And Brother Ben, it's Alim. Sorry, it's kind of hard to pronounce the part. Here you go. I spelled it for you in the chat, so it's Halim. Yeah, not Halim. Coco asks, can you examine how Muhammad is worshipped from Quran and Hadith? So yeah, possibly. Yeah, I'll look into doing that. And okay, Friendly Muslim, maybe we can do something along those lines. I don't know if you're on Twitter or on Instagram, but you can DM me there, and maybe we can set something up or discuss. Maybe if you have any questions that you want to ask me in private, feel free to do so. Yeah. And yeah, Brother Ben, it's Halim. Yeah. So yeah, okay. Unless there's last call for any questions. Any last questions? Give a couple of seconds. So yeah, and I'm glad that everyone in the comments, including the Muslims, are very friendly and civil. I know this is a very awkward and sensitive subject, and especially for people who really feel for Aisha's experience in all this. It's a very traumatizing subject, because who knows how many young women have gotten married, young children, young girls have gotten married because of this example of Muhammad. And this isn't something that we can just relegate to the past. This is something that happens today. Child marriage still exists. And I think one of the best ways we can use to kind of get rid of that, at least in the Muslim world, is to stop using Muhammad's moral guidance example of legitimizing this, which is what someone like Adnan Rashid is doing. Yeah. Okay. So thank you so much, Coco. And yeah, let's talk afterwards, friendly Muslim. So I'm going to end the stream now. Thank you, everyone, for watching. I'm hoping I can do live commentaries like this in the future if this is something that you found informative and interesting. And to be honest, it's more fun and entertaining to watch a dour, dark lecture like this with other people than just doing it on my own. And I hope that same goes for you. And if you do want to check out the entire lecture, because I did skim over parts, I left the link to the original video in the description for this video, so feel free to check it out. And yeah, all right, everyone, I hope you have a great weekend, and I'll be out with another video soon.